Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of Zachary Taylor, and the focus is Army of Occupation. The year is 1844. President John Tyler is in his last year of his administration, and his focus is on Texas. Texas had achieved its independence from Mexico in 1836 during Andrew Jackson's last year in office. Jackson really wanted to bring Texas into the American Union through annexation, but he didn't have the votes in Congress and he basically ran out of time. Martin Van Buren, his handpicked successor, then took over the presidency, and he implemented Jackson's policies to the letter to continue on except this one. He believed that if he tried to annex Texas at this time, it meant sure war with Mexico. He was unwilling to do that, and so the issue basically lay dormant during his administration. William Henry Harrison became president, died 1 month into office, and that's when John Tyler took over. In the last couple of years of the Tyler administration, he was really singularly focused on this mission to bring Texas into the American Union. In fact, he brought in a new Secretary of State, John Calhoun. This is April of 1844, who did negotiate a treaty of annexation with the independent Republic of Texas. It had a key stipulation. The Texans wanted some protection in case Mexico attacked, and they didn't want to wait for the treaty to be affirmed by the U.S. Senate. Once the treaty was signed, they wanted a military presence on their border, and the Americans agreed to send the Army to the Texas border and to send the American Navy into the Gulf of Mexico just in case the Mexicans decided to attack. The man on the ground for the Army, Brigadier General Zachary Taylor. Taylor took command of the 1st Department June 17, 1844 at Fort Jessup in Louisiana, just a handful of miles from the Texas border. Now, the U.S. Senate actually rejected this treaty, but John Tyler didn't give up, nor did he move his military out. He kept the Army and naval presence in place because he was still committed to getting this deal done. He decided to go a different route. Rather than a treaty which required 2/3 approval in the Senate, he went for a joint resolution of Congress, which brought the House of Representatives into the mix, but he only needed to get a majority vote. He fought for this all the way to the end of his administration, and with just a couple of days left, he got the vote he wanted, he signed the legislation into law, and then he turned the whole thing over to President James Polk. Well, Polk had run on a pro-Texas annexation platform, so he was all for this. In fact, Polk wanted more land. He believed in this concept of manifest destiny, of spreading the American way of life and form of government all across the North America, from sea to shining sea out to the Pacific. He wanted Mexican land of New Mexico. He wanted California. In addition to Texas, he was willing to buy it. He was also willing to fight for it. Well, when he took over, he had his Secretary of War, William Marcy, give some orders to the commander on the ground, Zachary Taylor, to actually move his troops into Texas and to go to the mouth of the Nueces River at Corpus Christi. The Nueces was a key point because this was disputed territory. Where was the southern border of Texas? And the Americans and the Texans thought one thing, the Mexicans thought something else. The Americans believed it went the Texas land all the way to the Rio Grande River. The Mexicans said, no, our territory goes all the way north to the Nueces River, and there's about 150 miles in dispute and an expanse in between. For now, Taylor and his men were clearly on American soil on the American side of the Nueces. It was called the Army of Occupation. Well, there was one last-ditch diplomatic effort by the Polk administration to try to avoid conflict of arms, and this was sending John Slidell as minister to represent the United States interests to try to settle some outstanding claims by American citizens and businesses against the Mexican government for some illegal actions, about $5 million there in dispute, and to try to buy land and to settle the southern border of Texas. This was his charge. He goes to Mexico City, and he is refused to be received by the Mexicans. They had broken off diplomatic relations with the Americans. Once that treaty with Texas had been signed, they would not receive the American minister. Slidell stayed a couple of months. He kept trying. He got angrier and angrier. Eventually, in early 1846, he left to come home. Not only was he angry, President Polk was angry. Polk wanted this land, and he wanted to get a deal done, and he decided to take a provocative step. He had Secretary of War Marcy send Taylor and his troops into the disputed territory all the way to the Rio Grande. His orders to Taylor were, it is not designed in our present relations with Mexico that you should treat her as an enemy. But should she assume that character by a declaration of war or any open act of hostility towards us, you will not act merely on the defensive. if your relative means enable you to do otherwise. Taylor did as ordered. He took his troops into the disputed area all the way down to the bank of the Rio Grande. He established Fort Texas, which he built just on the opposite of the Mexican town of Matamoros. Matamoros had about 7,000 Mexican troops there. The Mexicans were trying to get ready for what they thought was an imminent invasion, and they were outraged over this, coming in with troops into the disputed territory. The general on the ground, Pedro de Ampudia, told Taylor basically to get out. According to Ampudia, God and liberty, your government, in an incredible manner, has not only insulted but has exasperated the Mexican nation, bearing its conquering banner to the left bank of the Rio Bravo del Norte, the Rio Grande. I require you in all force to break up your camp and retire to the other bank of the Nueces River, while our governments are regulating the pending questions in relation to Texas. If you insist upon remaining upon the soil of the Department of Tamaulipas, it will clearly result that arms and arms alone must decide the question. And in that case, I advise you that we accept the war to which with so much injustice on your part you provoke us. Pretty bold statement by the Mexican general, to which Taylor said, look, I'm not moving. I have my orders. That's a political question. I am here and I am here to stay. Well, Taylor then took another provocative step on his own part. He blockaded the Rio Grande. This essentially cut off the supplies going to the Mexicans in Matamoros. That meant the people of Matamoros as well as the soldiers. This provocative act was practically daring the Mexicans to attack, which, by the way, was pretty much what James Polk, the President of the United States, wanted. He wanted this land, and if he could get the Mexicans to attack, to initiate a war, all the better. Well, on April 24th, 1836, General Mariana Arista assumed command of the Mexican forces, and under the pressure that they were under, he did cross the Rio Grande the very next day, a few miles from Zachary Taylor's camp. Taylor heard about this. He sent his captain, Seth Thornton, and his dragoons to investigate. He had 63 men with him, and they rode into an ambush. 11 Americans were killed, 6 were wounded, the rest were all captured. Now, Zachary Taylor was actually writing a letter to headquarters when he got word of what happened, so he added a PS. Since writing the above, an engagement has taken place between a detachment of our cavalry and the Mexicans, in which we are worsted. So the war has actually commenced, and the hardest must fend off. Well, President Polk essentially got what he wanted, because he used this when he immediately turned around and asked for a declaration of war from the U.S. Congress. He said to Congress, after reiterated menaces, Mexico has passed the boundary of the United States, has invaded our territory, and shed American blood upon the American soil. As war exists, and notwithstanding all our efforts to avoid it, exists by the act of Mexico herself, we are called upon by every consideration of duty and patriotism to vindicate with decision and honor the rights and the interest of our country. This was a very highly questionable statement. This was disputed territory at best, but Mexican played right into the hands of Polk, and he used that action to his advantage. He got his declaration of war, all of which was neither here nor there to Zachary Taylor. He had a job to do, and he was ready to take the fight to the enemy, which is the story for another day. That is Zachary Taylor, an Army of Occupation. From the life of Zachary Taylor. For more presidential chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles.